Chapter 3, Edmund and the Wardrobe. Lucy ran out of the empty room into the passage and found the other three. "It's all right," she repeated. "I've come back." "What on earth are you talking about, Lucy?" said Susan. "Why," said Lucy in amazement, "haven't you all been wondering where I was?" "So you've been hiding, have you?" said Peter. "Poor old Lou, hiding and nobody noticed. You'll have to hide longer than that if you want people to start looking for you." "But I've been away for hours and hours," said Lucy. The others all stared at one another. "Batty," said Edmund, tapping the side of his head. "Quite batty." "What do you mean, Lou?" said Peter. "What I said," answered Lucy. "It was just after breakfast when I went into the wardrobe, and I've been away for hours and hours, and I've had tea, and all sorts of things have happened." "Well, don't be silly, Lucy," said Susan. "We've only just come out of that room a moment ago, and you were there then." "Oh, she's not being silly at all," said Peter. "She's just making up a story for fun, aren't you, Lou? And why shouldn't she?" "No, Peter, I'm not," she said. It's a magic wardrobe. There's a wood inside of it, and it's snowing, and there's a faun and a witch, and it's called Narnia. Come and see." The others did not know what to think, but Lucy was so excited that they all went back with her into the room. She rushed ahead of them, flung open the doors of the wardrobe, and cried, "Now, go in and see for yourselves." "Why, you goose," said Susan, putting her head inside and pulling the fur coats apart. "It's just an ordinary wardrobe. Look, there's the back of it." Then everyone looked in and pulled the coats apart, and they all saw, Lucy herself saw, a perfectly ordinary wardrobe. There was no wood, no snow, only the back of the wardrobe with hooks on it. Peter went in and rapped his knuckles on it to make sure that it was solid. "A jolly good hoax, Lou," he said as he came out again. "You really have taken us in, I must admit. We half believed you." "But it wasn't a hoax at all," said Lucy, "really and truly. It was all different a moment ago. Honestly, it was, I promise." "Come on, Lou," said Peter. "That's going a bit far. You've had your joke. Hadn't you better drop it now?" Lucy grew very red in the face and tried to say something, though she hardly knew what she was trying to say, and she burst into tears. For the next few days she was miserable. She could have made it up with the others quite easily at any moment if she would have brought herself to say that the whole thing was only a story made up for fun. But Lucy was a very truthful girl, and she knew that she was really in the right, and she could not bring herself to say this. The others, who thought she was telling a lie, and a silly lie too, made her very unhappy. The two elder ones did this without meaning to, but Edmund could be spiteful, and on this occasion he was spiteful. He sneered and jeered at Lucy and kept on asking her if she had found any other new countries and any other cupboards all over the house. What made it worse was that these days ought to have been delightful. The weather was fine, and they were out of doors from morning to night, bathing, fishing, climbing trees, and lying in the heather. But Lucy could not properly enjoy any of it, and so things went on until the very next wet day. That day, when it came to the afternoon and there was no sign of a break in the weather, they decided to play hide and seek. Susan was it, and as soon as the others scattered to hide, Lucy went to the room where the wardrobe was. She did not mean to hide in the wardrobe because she knew that would only set the others talking again about the whole wretched business. But she did want to have one more look inside, for by this time she was beginning to wonder herself whether Narnia and the faun had not been a dream. The house was so large and complicated and full of hiding places that she thought she would have time to have one look in the wardrobe and then hide somewhere else. But as soon as she reached in, she heard the steps of the passage outside, and then there was nothing for it but to jump in the wardrobe and hold the door closed behind her. She did not shut it properly because she knew that it was very silly to shut oneself into a wardrobe, even if it is not a magic one. Now the steps she had heard were those of Edmund, and he came into the room just in time to see Lucy vanishing into the wardrobe. He had once decided to get into it himself, not because he thought it was a particularly good hiding place, but because he wanted to go on teasing her about the imaginary country. He opened the door, and there were the coats hanging up as usual, the smell of mothballs and darkness and silence, and no sign of Lucy. "She thinks I'm Susan come to catch her," said Edmund to himself, "and so she's keeping very quiet at the back." He jumped in and shut the door, forgetting what a very foolish thing this is to do. Then he began feeling about for Lucy in the dark. He'd expected to find her in a few seconds and was very surprised when he did not. He decided to open the door again and let in some light, but he couldn't find the door either. He didn't like this at all and began groping wildly in every direction. He even shouted out, "Lucy! Lou, where are you? I know you're here!" And there was no answer. And Edmund noticed his own voice had a curious sound. Not the sound you'd expect in a cupboard, but a kind of open air sound. He also noticed he was unexpectedly cold. And then he saw a light. "Oh, thank goodness," said Edmund. The door must have swung open on its own accord. And he forgot all about Lucy and went toward the light, which he thought was the open door of the wardrobe. But instead of finding himself stepping out into the spare room, he found himself stepping out from the shadow of some thick, dark fir trees in an open place in the middle of a wood. There was a crisp, dry snow under his feet, and more snow lying on the branches of the trees. Overhead there was a pale blue sky, the sort of sky one sees on a fine winter day in the morning. Straight ahead of him he saw between the tree trunks the sun, just rising, very red and clear. Everything was perfectly still, as if he were the only living creature in that country. There was not even a robin or a squirrel among the trees, and the woods stretched as far as he could see in every direction. He shivered. He now remembered that he had been looking for Lucy, and also how unpleasant he had been to her about her imaginary country, which now turned out to have not been imaginary at all. He thought she must be somewhere close by, and so he shouted, "Lucy! Lucy! I'm here too, Edmund!" There was no answer. "She's angry about all the things I've been saying lately," thought Edmund, and he thought he did not like to admit that he had been wrong, but he also didn't much like the idea of being alone in this strange, cold, quiet place. So he shouted again, "I say, Lou, I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I see you were right all along. Do come out. Make it, Pax." Still, no answer. "Just like a girl," said Edmund to himself, "sulking somewhere and won't accept an apology." He looked around him again and decided he did not much like this place. He had almost made up his mind to go home when he heard very far off in the wood a sound of bells. He listened, and the sound came nearer and nearer, and at last there swept into sight a sledge drawn by 2 reindeer. The reindeer were about the size of Shetland ponies, and their hair was so white that even the snow hardly looked white in comparison with them. Their branching horns were gilded and shone like something on fire when the sunrise caught them. Their harness was of scarlet leather, covered with bells. On the sledge, driving the reindeer, sat a fat dwarf who would have been about 3 feet high if he had been standing. He was dressed in a polar bear's fur, and on his head he wore a red hood with a long gold tassel hanging down from its point. Its huge head covered his knees and served him instead of a mug. But behind him, on a much higher seat in the middle of the sledge, sat a very different person, a great lady, taller than any woman that Edmund had ever seen. She was also covered in white fur up to her throat, and held a long, straight golden wand in her right hand, and wore a golden crown on her head. Her face was white, not merely pale, but white, like snow or paper or icing sugar, except for her very red mouth. It was a beautiful face in other respects, but proud, cold, stern. The sledge was a fine sight as it came sweeping towards Edmund with the bells jingling and the dwarf cracking his whip and the snow flying on each side of it. "Stop!" said the lady. The dwarf pulled up the reindeer so sharp they almost sat down. They recovered themselves and stood champing at their bits and blowing. The frosty air, the breath was coming out of their nostrils, looked like smoke. "And what, pray, are you?" said the lady, looking hard at Edmund. My name's Edmund," said Edmund rather awkwardly. He did not like the way she was looking at him. The lady frowned. "Is that how you address a queen?" she asked, looking sterner than ever. I beg your pardon, your majesty. I didn't know," said Edmund. "Not know the Queen of Narnia!" cried the queen. "Ha! You shall know us better hereafter, but I repeat, what are you?" Please, your majesty," said Edmund. I don't know what you mean. I'm at school. At least I was. It's the holidays now. And that's the end of chapter 3. So I never had a little sister. I had an older sister. But I've got to say, I kind of identify with Edmund here. I know what it's like to give that sister a hard time, to annoy them, to tease them, to pick at them, poke at them, and to make myself feel better at their expense. It's not a good thing, but it's a way that I kind of identify with Edmund, even his crummy parts. He has the chance now to be with Lucy in this adventure. But where's his head and where's his heart? Almost immediately, he's annoyed because now he's going to have to apologize. And he's thinking that she's going to make fun of him the way that he likes to make fun of her. Well, the poor guy, he just can't seem to get it through his head that Lucy doesn't see this in that way at all. And it's not about the situation and apologies and teasing. It's really more about him. He just seems to be the kind of kid right now who doesn't realize that it's not in Lucy's nature to want to tease him and hold it over him or make him feel bad that he was wrong. Just because he would do it doesn't mean that she will. And so sometimes maybe getting out of our own way, getting out of our own heads, and not assuming the worst of other people, especially assuming that they're going to have the same bad attitude that we might. So I'm not going to make an excuse for Edmund. I'm not going to say it was good or right. Just that, unfortunately, I kind of get it. Been there, done that. But hopefully these days a little wiser and more mature, and maybe put that one behind me.